We'll give everybody a chance to jump on here pretty quickly. Okay. I know a lot of people get notifications, so I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. Hey, Tina. Hey, Miss Pat. Good to see y'all tonight. Tina, if Adam's with you, or if he's not with you, tell him to, I want to talk with him about working on the streaming up at the building. I think we're going to continue to stream even after we start services back up. So just tell him his schedule a little bit more crowded than mine. So just tell him that I just want to talk with him as soon as he gets a chance, and he's not busy doing something else. If he's there with you, then he heard everything I just said. All right. I know there'll be some more people that'll get on here in just a couple of moments, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you'd like to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 18. 2 Samuel 18 is where we're going to get our text from this evening. I hope everybody is doing well. In spite of the rain, we were able to get out. We were at the building for a little bit today, saw some folks. It's good to see them. And if anybody needs anything from the building that doesn't have a key, let us know. We're usually there on Tuesday or Wednesday from 11 to 1, so if you need to come by, I see just about everybody here, though, has a key to the building anyway. I think it's probably on one hand how many people don't have a key to the building. So, Brother William, good to see you this evening. I know you can't speak back, but it's good to see you. Hope everything's going well with everyone who is here so far. I've been asked a couple of times, as if I have some sort of authority over when we start meeting again, but we had talked about May 17th being our first Sunday back, and likely we will have Sunday morning service, and then we'll let everybody go home, because a lot of people, if you go out, you don't have to come back to the building. You'd like to go back, head on home, and then we will slowly add in the Sunday afternoon and then the Wednesday night. But we would like to get everything back to normal, at least at the building, as quickly as possible. So we're looking at May 17th being the first Sunday morning to be back, regular time, regular station. And if anybody's got any questions, or if anybody wants to add anything to that, let us know. Like I said, I have no authority to say this one way or another, but we had spoken about that in the past. So we're finally coming out from under the shelter-in-place orders. The churches are already able to be open no matter how many people. They just ask us to be careful, and of course we will do that. We'll make sure that everybody's able to stay far enough away from each other as comfortable. And we will continue to use the little pre-manufactured communion cups for the time being. And then, eventually we're going to have to get back into the way we were. It's just to maintain our sanity, so to speak. But if somebody's not feeling well enough to be there, then that's certainly something they need to think about. And this is not a requirement. God's not sitting there with a clipboard taking names. If it's uncomfortable, or if your health is compromised and you don't feel comfortable doing it, then stay home. That's what we're going to try to work on, the streaming, so that we can continue to do that for some time until people are able to be more comfortable being there. All right. 2 Samuel chapter 18, verses 31 through 33. This is, of course, the account of David finding out that his son Absalom his life has been taken. And I'm going to read this, and then we're going to get glean a little bit of information from it, because I believe the account that we see in Absalom actually has a bearing on us today. We see some of the attitudes that were expressed in the account of David and his son Absalom, and we see those even in the Lord's church today. In the same way, not exactly, but the attitudes are there. The thought processes behind some of the things that are going on in this account we find even today. All right, so let's get started. 2 Samuel 18, verses 31 through 33 states, "Just then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, 'There's good news for you, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you.'" Now, what's happened is essentially this. David almost, if the Lord had not been behind his kingdom, David's kingdom would have been pulled out from underneath him. The road would have been pulled out from underneath David. Absalom had the hearts and the souls of the people. They had just basically given themselves over to Absalom, because he was telling them he was going to give them what they wanted. He was going to give them what they desired. But because of God's promise that David's throne would never depart from him, God allowed him to be avenged against those who would take his kingdom away from him. All right, but look at all of this. In spite of the fact that David's kingdom is still in place, that for the most part things would be able to continue on as normal, look at what David's first thought is in this. "And the king said to the Cushite," David says to the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Now it shows where his heart is. His kingdom has been in turmoil and in tumult and in chaos. Absalom has pitched himself against his father. He's had all his armies fight against his father's armies. David had to flee for his life out of the city of Jerusalem. David had to flee up into the hills. David was, of course, had been used to that with Saul, but David had been on the throne for quite some time. And now he's having to yet again flee from Jerusalem. So he flees up into the hills in Jerusalem, and then come to find out that his kingdom is safe. And look at what the Cushite says. The Cushite answered, "May the enemies of the Lord my king, of my lord the king, and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man." Well, the verdict has come down. Absalom is no more. His life was taken from him because he was found in rebellion against the king. God's divine providence protecting David dictated that Absalom's life must be taken. There's no other way around it. If Absalom had been allowed to live, he would have done this again and again and again and again and again. So God, in his infinite wisdom, took Absalom out of the picture. And instead of being grateful to God for the saving of his life and the preservation of his kingdom, it says, "Then the king was deeply moved, and he went up to the chamber over the gate, and he wept. And as he went, he said thus, 'O Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died in your place, O Absalom, my son, my son.'" This just goes to show that David was weak, as we are all weak. We don't look at things properly. We don't put things into the proper perspective. David was willing to give up his life so that his son's life would not be taken, even though Absalom would have taken his life if possible and if necessary, and in doing so harmed the Lord's anointed. So here's Absalom seeking the life of his father, desiring the kingdom for himself. David has been delivered, and David is looking at things all wrong. His mind is not right. And this goes to show that even though we are servants of God, even though we try most of the time to do the right thing, we can still be found in opposition to God. That's unfortunately the case. David, this is nothing new to David. Often we point to the incident of Bathsheba to demonstrate the weakness of David. David had weaknesses. One of his weaknesses was his children. He was not willing to rein in his son Absalom. He was not able to rein in his own lust when it came to Bathsheba. I think it's just good for us, though, that we know these things. Not that David did these things, but that we know these things. God's never shied away from dictating and to keep in history, transcribing all of the sins and transgressions of his people. He doesn't try to make any kind of, he doesn't brook any illusions that his people are perfect. He writes down all of the shortcomings of his people, and I think it's good that this happens. I'm glad that God did this, because it lets us know absolutely that even those after God's own heart often sin and they fall short, sometimes even in a major way. We look at two of the things, the two major issues with David, and we see where these were huge things. The kingdom was in danger of being torn completely apart. Even before Solomon's death, here was an opportunity for this kingdom to be torn completely apart, because you would have the loyalists to David, and then you would have the rebellion of Absalom, and who knows what Absalom would have done to those who remained loyal to his father. The kingdom would have been in terrible turmoil and would have been opened up to enemy attack. Then we see, of course, the more of the what we would call the private sin of David with Bathsheba. So we have the open sin and the private sin, and both of these show the weaknesses of God's people. Even today, God's people have weaknesses. Every single one of us has a weakness, and of course, that's where Satan tempts us, isn't it? He looks at each one of us, and he knows us oftentimes better than we know ourselves. He knows what to say. He knows who he needs to get to tempt us, what he needs to tempt us with, so that we will fall away and fall short. So I'm thankful that God doesn't gloss over the iniquities of his children. He writes it out in full view, so that we have a knowledge, so that we don't fall into those same traps. We at least have an example either to follow or one to shy away from. Okay, now how did all of this come about? Well, in 2 Samuel chapter 13, Amnon, who was the first son of David, he falls in love with his half-sister Tamar. Now, this was bad enough in and of itself, the fact that he would lust after someone that he had no right to. He didn't even need to be looking at this woman to lust after her, because at that point he'd already committed adultery with her, and he had no right to this girl. But instead of pushing that sin away and to shy away from that sin, he schemes with his cousin Jonadab to find a way to have her for himself. And this again shows one of the follies that can befall us, and that's the idea of trusting in our peers. Oftentimes, people our own age may not be the smartest, especially when we're young. When we need wisdom, we need to go to somebody older and wiser than we are. We know where the son of Solomon looked to his young friends for advice on how to treat this kingdom that he had come into possession of, and of course they gave him all the wrong advice, and it cost the kingdom. So anyway, continuing on, Tamar comes to Amnon to care for her sick half-brother. While she is there, he forces himself on her in violation of, number one, God's law, and number two, violation of her own body. He had no right to her. This was a sin against her. It was a sin against God, and he stood condemned because of his actions. Unfortunately, as is the case with children of maybe more well-to-do, wealthier people, people of prominence, people of importance, this horrible, repugnant sin before God is swept under the rug. Afterwards, it says that he hated her as much as he loved her before, and it just goes to show the wickedness of man's heart. Had he simply repented of that sin and even gone to her and said, "Listen, I can't bring back what I took from you, but I can make things right as much as I possibly could," then the problems that occurred later would not have occurred. But he would not do this. Instead, he pushed her away. Instead of doing what was right under God's law at that time, he would not do it. And she pleads for justice, she pleads for mercy, and she's rejected. Now Absalom, in the anger of youth, the folly of youth, decides he's going to take matters into his own hands. And he waits for 2 full years before he takes his revenge. He wants to make sure that none of this is going to come back to simply an act of justice in the moment, spur of the moment type of thing. David, however, over all of this time, does absolutely nothing for Tamar. He doesn't even punish his own son for this evil thing that he has done, in full knowledge of everyone that knows about it, that now looks at him in that way, and now looks at David saying, you're the king. You have the right to take action here. What are you going to do? David, because he will not rein in his son Amnon, it costs him that son, and then he won't rein in Absalom, and it costs him that son. So we see we know where David's weaknesses were. If we can't look at anything else, we can see where David's weaknesses were in regards to his own family. All right. So Absalom takes Amnon's life, and then he flees from his father. And, of course, the punishment. We don't know what would have happened. At this point, we're not sure if David's capable of disciplining his children in any way, shape, or form. Odds are he likely wouldn't have even punished Absalom for his taking of Amnon's life. We don't know, and I'm not going to engage in conjecture here, but who knows what's going to happen. Obviously, he's not capable or willing to do what he needs to do. Now, flash forward 3 years, and Absalom's back in Jerusalem, but he's estranged from his father. All right. He will not go before he will not show himself to his father. And actually in 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 24, it says, "And the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face." So David is compounding error upon error upon error here. It just goes to show, while David was a man after God's own heart, at this point, David has rejected God's counsel. It was in the law what the punishment was for one thing, Amnon's sin, and for another, Absalom's sin. And David is not willing to do anything about it. So he's essentially what we would say washing his hands of the matter. Well, I don't have to do anything. I don't see him. I don't want him to come to the palace. Let him go to his own house. I don't want anything to do with it. In doing so, David he's burying his head in the sand, so to speak. So David's house was in a mess. That's all there is to it. His house is an absolute mess, and he's not doing anything in regards to this. All right. So now compare David's reception of Absalom with the people's reception of Absalom. This shows the people knew what had happened. The people had been made aware of the situation. And Absalom actually receives a hero's welcome in his revenge on Amnon. He goes before the people, and the people love him. And they begin to give him deference. They begin to give him an authority that he does not have. They give him a respect and an admiration that he's not supposed to have. Look at what happens in chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. Absalom takes this advantage that he has amongst the people, the love of the people, and he works this to his own advantage and slowly beginning to erode the authority that his father has. Look what he says in verses 1 through 6. "After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, 'What city are you from?' And he would say, 'Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel.' Then Absalom would say to him, 'Look, your case is good and it's right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you.' Moreover, Absalom would say, 'Oh, that I were made judge in the land. And everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice.'" So you see what's happening. He's subverting the authority of his father. He's taking the adulation of the people. He's taking the deference of the people, and he's bringing it to himself. He wants what his father has. Now, we don't know if this was the case before this. We don't see where Absalom wanted to be king anywhere before this happened. But what he did was he saw how the people treated him, and he liked it. He began to be jealous of his father's authority and his father's position as king. And he wanted that for himself. So it goes to show, even when our cause is right, we have to be careful that we don't get too wrapped up in our own self-importance. And this is unfortunately what Absalom had. And we see here at this point, nowhere does David rein Absalom in, and it costs him dearly. If he had just simply seen his son and made amends and made things right, this probably would not have happened, but he wouldn't do it. All right. So he relied on his own wisdom and his own judgment, and this was a bad situation. So it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and he would take him and he would kiss him. So he's just going after the people, and he knows exactly what to say and exactly what to do to get the people to look at him in the way that they look at his father. Remember, David was a beloved king, and this is how he did it. He promised them what they wanted. And it says, in this manner Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the heart of all of the men of Israel. All right? And as I said a second ago, David right now is doing nothing to curb this. He's doing nothing to quash this. He loves his son too much. He has a misplaced love for his son. He loves him too much to do what really is necessary to do. Now, his best course of action was to speak to Absalom, and if that failed, to strike him down, to punish him for his wickedness in trying to usurp the throne. It wasn't his. And it wasn't David's to give to him. So this was not something that was to be done. All right. Now, as I said earlier, we look at this case of Absalom and we think, well, what does that have to do with us? Do we see anything going on today that we can look and we can glean from the account of Absalom and David the king and apply it to today? Now we have to be careful. We can't parse out and take verbatim things and say, well, this corresponds to this and this corresponds to this. What we're looking at is our overarching attitudes, mindsets that we see here that we can bring forward and we can look at today. All right, let's think about this. Number one, God gave us a church that is ordained and sanctified by Him. So we are part of a church that is ordained and it is sanctified by God. God said that He would defend her and that He would redeem her. All right. Now where's our counterpoint? David was ordained by God. God was with him during the times that both Saul and Absalom sought his life. So there are two precepts and two attitudes that run parallel here. All right. David was ordained by God. We are in a church that is ordained by God. God defended David from both Saul and Absalom. God will defend His church even today. Will we still have to undergo persecution? Yes. But will He guard her? Yes, because we've been promised that the church will never disappear from the earth. It will never go away. The gates of death itself cannot prevail against the Lord's church because God is at the head of His church. All right. Number two, Absalom was unhappy with David because how he handled Tamar and Amnon. And to be honest with you, I'm unhappy with David, the way he handled Tamar and Amnon. This was a perfect opportunity for David to show the people that he will not play favorites. His son did something wrong and his son must pay the penalty for it. But he wouldn't do it. He messed up badly. And it cost a lot of people a lot. And Absalom used this anger to justify what he was doing. He used this anger to justify usurping the throne away from his father, who was the rightful king. Now, how do we look at this today? What's that attitude that we find today in the Lord's church? Well, there are those who are unhappy with the way with some of the problems in the church and the way that our problems are handled in the church, and with the way the Bible is preached and the way the Bible is taught. It does not justify overthrowing the church. It doesn't justify changing what we find in scriptures in regards to the church. Same way Absalom was not justified in doing what he was doing. There are people today who would do just that. They don't like the way the church is established. They don't like the way the church is, the authority is set up in the church, and they will find ways, and they will justify ways in which they can subvert that biblical authority. But we see what happened when Absalom justified his usurping the throne. The kingdom almost fell apart. It would have been a bad situation. Absalom was not capable of being king. He was not king material. He was not anointed by God to be king. And it wasn't supposed to come to him. In the same way, these people who feel that the way the church has been doing things for 2,000 years is just antiquated and it needs to go away. We need to bring in new ideas and new ways of doing things in clear violation of Scripture. We see what would happen. And we see today how many churches have entire congregations have gone into apostasy. They've gone into error because someone who felt justified in doing so was allowed to run rampant in the church and to tear it apart. Number three, Absalom turned the people away from their father David by appealing to their human desire for what he would call justice. Remember, what he would do is he would sit outside the gates of the city. When people would come, the first person they would see was him, and he would have all of these men with these chariots surrounding him. This is a man of importance. And when a man of importance reaches out to the average, everyday, common man, they feel somewhat happy. They're excited. They've been recognized. And here's Absalom saying, where are you from? Oh, I know where that is, and I have neighbors, I have friends, I have family there, and what's going on? Well, my father's too busy. There's no one there to take your complaint. But if I were king, I'd make sure you were taken care of. So Absalom turned the people away from his father by appealing to their desire for justice. Well, today we have people who desire to turn people away from God because they say, and tell me if I know there are probably going to be people smiling and nodding when I say this. There'll be people who say, don't you think it's just not right that women can't do everything men could do? Don't you think it just doesn't make any sense that only these people could do these things and these people are not allowed to do these things? Why is it that this man is an elder and I'm not an elder? Why not? I don't fit all of the qualifications, but why is that the case and not me? Why is it that we as the Lord's church feel that we need to be so self-involved and insular instead of reaching out to other churches and other denominations? And notice I said the word other because there are those in the Lord's church who do look at us as simply yet another denomination. I've heard people say it. Why don't we reach out to the other denominations and form some sort of coalition and come together and maybe swap preachers every so often and get to know one another. Listen, we're all in the same boat. We're all going to the same place. We're just using different means. Well, as Absalom appealed to their very human sense of justice and right, today we have people doing the same thing. They're appealing to people's, does this make sense to you? And they whisper in people's ears and they try to pull them away from the truth. The truth is not always popular. The truth is sometimes to us doesn't make sense, but we have to understand that it's truth because it came from God, not because it makes sense to our human ears. I'll be honest with you. In my study of Leviticus, I looked at some of the reasons, some of the things that God commanded the Israelites to do, and of course that followed through even into the Jews, or the Israelites in David's time, even to the Jews of Jesus' time. And I look at some of the things that he required them to do. In my very human standpoint, I don't understand them. They don't make sense to me from a human standpoint, but God spoke them, therefore they are truth. And I have no right to say, well, I'm going to interject my very human wisdom and interpose that between God's wisdom and everyone else. I don't have that right. And when I do so, I deserve the punishment that I receive. And here's the case. Absalom was appealing to mankind's desire for justice, for right. And today we have people who are appealing to the human standpoint of justice and right. Why is this done and not this done? This isn't fair. Instead of looking at God's word and saying, it's fair because God is a fair God. And this is as fair as it gets in regards to righteousness. All right, number 4. David would not, and this is one of my most important one to me, David would not discipline or rein in his son Absalom because of a misplaced love. Actually, he wouldn't do either one, Amnon or Absalom. Neither one would he rein in. He allowed his daughter Tamar to be violated with no justice because of a misplaced love for his children. I don't know if he was in denial that it happened, or if he simply believed that if he had to do something, he would not be capable of doing something to discipline these children or to punish them for what they've done. Today, what do we find? We find people who are not willing to rein in errant Christians. We don't throw that rope out and pull them back, kicking and screaming if necessary, to grab them by the face and to look them in the face and say, you don't know what you're doing to yourself. We don't want to hurt their feelings. We're worried we might lose a friend. We might not want to run off the right people. We'll allow, hey, we're not, these people, they're not really active. They don't really do anything. They don't give. They don't do anything. Let them go. But we don't want to rush these. We don't want to run these guys off. So we're tempted. And listen, let me tell you, preachers oftentimes are tempted in themselves. I don't know if I should preach this because I might run someone off. Elders sometimes say, we have to look at this, and we got to be careful. We don't want to run anybody off. And certainly nobody wants to run anybody off, but we have to make sure that our misplaced desires don't lead to unscriptural actions. And this is the case, and it's happened. And if we say that the Lord's church is unique in this, we are crazy. That is absolutely untrue. Nobody wants to cause offense or run someone off because of something that we said. But we cannot be afraid to do the right thing for the right reason, even if someone's feelings might be hurt. That they may say, well, I can't be here anymore. We have to say, listen, that's not the way you need to look at this. You need to look at this as God is disciplining you. He wants you to do the right thing. But if they persist in it, even God says, for someone like that, you can't do anything other than to let them go. You have to let them go. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much of a friend they are, you have to let them go. Because if they stay, all it will do, as we find in the case of Absalom, all it's going to do is poison the church. We can't be afraid to let folks go. Some folks even don't want to admit wrong when they're in the wrong. So there's all of this misplaced loyalties, misplaced friendship, misplaced love, lack of desire for discipline, all of these things. And it's not to be found in the church. If David had done the right thing, the kingdom would not have been in peril. When we do the right thing, the kingdom will not be in peril. We have to look at this as a cautionary tale, so to speak, okay? Number 5, Absalom became power hungry, and he tried to seize by force David's kingdom from him. And there are those in the wrong who will attempt to overthrow the church, and they will attempt to implant their own doctrine, to supplant the doctrine of Christ with their own doctrine. I mentioned this a little bit further, but this is a case of people who actually come in to seek. It's not a matter of subverting things by speaking behind the scenes. These are people who they make no bones about it. We're here to change things. We're here to shake things up. Way we've been doing things for 2,000 years is just not working, and we're making a change here. We cannot be scared to call that out for exactly what that is. We cannot be scared for calling that exactly what that is. These are wolves. They have come in to scatter the flock, and we cannot be afraid to call it for what it is and do what is necessary to keep it from happening. You know, folks, sometimes these people who do these kind of things, sometimes they're successful. Often they're not. You know, we said that earlier, that God protects the church as he did David. But at the end of the day, the damage is done, and sometimes the church is split, and it's split irreparably. I know even today, groups that have split from one another, and they have been split for 30, 40 years. And in many cases, there are people in the congregations who don't even know why in the world it is that the group split. The details, as they say, are lost in the sands of time. But, well, you know, they split 30 years ago. Well, why? Well, we don't know, but it was probably had to have been for a good reason. Was there anything keeping us from coming back together again? Well, you know, I don't think they'd be amenable to it, and I know nobody here would be amenable to it. And there we go, 2 separate but equal churches marching down the same pathway, each of them oblivious of the other, only knowing each other just by glancing over and saying, well, yeah, they're doing this, but we don't have anything to do with them. They don't have anything to do with us. We don't fellowship with them. They don't fellowship with us. And how short-sighted and foolish that is. But again, we're speaking of human beings. Oftentimes we can be foolish and we can be short-sighted. So here's just, like I said, this is just a case study of the account of Absalom, all of the foolish decision-making and the ridiculous nature of the participants in all of this. And the only person that had done nothing wrong was Tamar, and she only received justice because her brother was so angry that he plotted to do it, and then instead of allowing that to be done, then he wanted to usurp the authority of his father. So the only person that had any sense about them was Tamar, and she was violated against her will and only saw punishment because of her brother. Just a group of people who every bit of it was just foolishness. And of course, God saw fit to preserve that record. And I'm glad he did, because folks, we learned a lesson from it. Things to do, things not to do. When family drama gets out of control. So I'm glad that everybody's here tonight. I know we got a pretty good group of folks. I'm glad to see everybody. I know we got some visitors that are joining us. Good to see Billy. When all this is over, brother, you need to come back and lead singing for us again, okay? Beth Saeed's with us. Good to see her. Sister Boykin is with us. Good to see her. Mike and the family are there. Tanis, and I assume Dan's with her. Miss Kathy, good to see you tonight. Brother Richard, good to see you. And I know we've got some folks that were with us with our sorry, I just looked over, and this is the problem with me doing tech. Our Zoom meeting was going, and I forgot to hit unmute. So there are people who called to listen in on our meeting, and I proceeded to not unmute me because I didn't want anybody to hear what was going on in the background with the dogs and everything like that. I apologize. I'm going to reach out to some folks. We see who they were, and I'm going to call them and apologize. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up your time with that. But anyway, let's stop and have a word of prayer, and then we'll finish up with our meeting tonight. Okay. Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful for the day that you blessed us with, and we're grateful, Lord, for all that you do for us. We're thankful for your Son who died on the cross for us. We're thankful that he did that thing that we read about in the scriptures that is so horrible for him to undergo, and he did that for us because he loved us and because you sent him, and he was obedient to death. We're thankful for the example of your children and your people in the Bible. We learn from both good examples and bad examples. And we see the account of Absalom and his father, and we see what happens when human beings don't seek after your wisdom and look to your precepts and your laws to dictate their actions, and when they take actions into their own hands. And we see the consequences that can come from that. As David's kingdom was almost taken away from him, we see that the Lord's church, the kingdom of heaven, can be destroyed. His influence can be destroyed. His children can be scattered because of the inaction of people, or even by their overt actions. And we pray, Lord, that you help us to have a discerning eye, to be vigilant and sober, keeping an eye on things and making sure that we do what's right in your sight. Lord, bless us as we leave and dismiss from our meeting tonight. We're thankful, Lord, for all that you do for us. We're grateful for our ability to meet even in such a way as this. And we're grateful, Lord, that we can come back together again. We're looking for that time. We're prayerful, Lord, that the 17th of May will be our first Sunday morning back with one another. We pray that those who are able to come and meet. Those who are unable to can continue to watch through streaming, and we're grateful, Lord, that we can continue to do that. Be with us, Lord. Bless us and keep us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Folks, have a great evening, and we will see you on Friday night.